Welcome back to Autoimmune Adventures. I'm Stacy and I'm here with my sisters Becky and Alicia. Today we are so excited to introduce you to our guest, whose story embodies resilience, creativity, and hope. Annie Toro Lopez is a cookbook author, a chronic illness advocate, and an inspiring voice in the celiac and autoimmune communities. Diagnosed with lupus in her 20s, Annie has walked a challenging road, but one that is also filled with triumph, healing, and giving back. She's here to share her journey with us and is taking a little bit of time out from her book tour to meet with us here. So we're really excited that she's here with us today. And she's going to share with us about her brand new cookbook, Simply Gluten-Free, Real Ingredients for Everyday Life. Annie, welcome. We are really happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, and I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. This is I love what you're doing, and I really support your quest here.
Can you share a little bit about your early health journey and what it was like being diagnosed with lupus in your 20s?
So I was diagnosed in my 20s, but I'm pretty sure that I had lupus when I was probably around 18. The first thing I really remember being was I was going to school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. It was very cold, and I remember getting to class and my hands were so frozen and white that I couldn't even hold a pencil. And you know, when you're young, some of those things you just think are normal, right? You don't really realize that some people, when they get to class, actually are able to take notes right away. So, you know, it doesn't take them a half hour for their hands to warm up enough to hold a pencil. When I was in I was in my very early 20s, 21, 22, I had a doctor who I had long enough to recognize what was going on. Like, she started questioning when I would come in. I remember I went in with, I tested for hyperthyroidism, right? And then she tested again later and it went away. And she's like, so that doesn't happen. Like that doesn't just go away. And then when she finally was like, I want to test you for lupus, I was presenting with ulcers on my legs and my skin. So I was having skin involvement and my toes were like purple. And I was a vet tech, and I was working for a vet at the time. I've worn a lot of hats, done a lot of things. I was a vet tech, and I remember, you know, we were there late, whatever, emergency, whatever, and taking off my shoes. And his wife was like, there's some, you know, like, what's wrong with your feet? Like, they're purple. And I was like, well, is it, you know, I'm on my feet a lot. She's like, no. So my doctor, Dr. Hebel, she was amazing. Teresa Hebel was amazing. She said, I want to test you for lupus. And of course, I'm just like, okay, because I didn't know what it was. I was like, all right, whatever. And when she got, and of course, you all know that lupus, there's no definitive test for lupus. There's no single test. You meet a list of criteria, but that a high 90%, 97%, I'm going to say somewhere in that neighborhood, people with lupus have a positive ANA. So she tested my ANA and it came back and it was off the charts. She's like, you know, it's crazy high. Well, so then you start, you know, so then you get, I got passed out, you know, so then it's like, we'll send you to a rheumatologist and we're going to send you to a nephrologist and we're going to send you to a cardiologist. And so you're seeing all the doctors and they're taking all the blood and you have 12 vials of blood drawn every time. You know how it is. It's completely life-changing. You're in an entirely different place. And I went on all the drugs they put me on, Plaquenil and prednisone and all of the things. And I started questioning why I was sick what am I feeling? Am I sick because of all these really difficult drugs? Like, and I know Plaquenil and prednisone, they change you. They change your chemistry in you. And I was sick all the time. And then I'm like, I want to know, am I sick because my body is sick? Like, am I sick because my body, or am I sick because of the drugs? And I'm not a doctor here, and I was a vet tech, but I have no other medical training, right? So I'm not advocating. I don't want to, lead your listeners to always talk to your doctor. I weaned myself off all of the medication. I talked to my doctor about what I wanted to do. And she gave me probably the best advice I've ever received, because I told her, I said, I don't want to live sick. I don't want to live ill. I don't want to define myself by my illness. I want to define myself by wellness. I want to deny that I have this disease. I don't want to live with this mindset. So she said, deny all you want, deny away, live your life the way you want to live it. And you come back every 6 months and we test your blood and we make sure that you're stable and doing okay. Keep in touch. And it was like giving me permission to live a certain way. It was like giving me permission to like not just show up at the doctor's office and be a patient, but to really live my life and just say, this is just a part of who I am. And that was it helped my mind set.
You eventually got a negative ANA test after 20 years, I understand. So that is huge. And you kind of already touched on what that did, like how that shifted your perspective back in your 20s when you made that choice that I'm going to live my life. So how did getting a negative ANA test, how did that shift your perspective on your health 20 years later?
So I think to answer that, I'm going to back up just a little bit to kind of what I chose to do to achieve that negative ANA. When I had my son, when I was 25, and of course, with lupus, pregnancy is high risk. They told me, pregnancy is high risk. I did not comprehend at all at the time that what that meant was that with an ANA, which is, I assume since you talk about this that your listeners probably know what an anti-nuclear antibody is. Since your antibody attacks the nucleus of a cell, which is the energy of a cell, and that with lupus it's indiscriminate, right? It'll attack anything. That means it can attack fetal cells just as easily as kidney cells or my eyes or my skin, which I was dealing with. I didn't comprehend that at the time. I just, I did have difficult pregnancies. My babies were small. They both went straight into ICU or NICU. After I had my son, I couldn't stop crying. For months, I just cried and cried. And I was really fortunate because I had an OB, nurse practitioner, who said, sometimes when people have babies, it brings up their own issues, right? From your own past. Here's the name of a really good therapist. Therapy was really, and I am answering this question. Therapy led to my ability to have a negative ANA. Facing my own demons, facing my own past, because, as women, we all know that most of us have trauma in our childhoods, right? In our past. And that they found, I don't know, The Body Keeps the Score. I'm sure you've talked about that, right?
Yep, I'm reading it right now.
It's so good. Yeah, right? It's so good. And it was for me, that book is so validating because it's exactly what I went through to have a negative ANA. But I just did it. Like I just did it. Like it, but now it's like, yeah, yep, that's what I did. Yep, that's exactly it. And having therapy and facing those things and being able to tell my story and feel safe again was a lot of, help me move the bar, help me feel worth moving the bar for. So after I was diagnosed, I'm a researcher. My degree's in English literature. So like I'm a researcher. I taught middle school literacy for a decade. When I found out what a positive ANA means, when they would say there's no cure, you can't cure lupus, because when you have an antibody in your body, that's the antibody's job, is to live in your body and to attack the things that it's programmed to attack. It won't ever go away. That's what an antibody is. That's what they told me. So I started asking the question, why would this happen? Like, why is my body doing this to myself? Why would I be releasing something that's hurting me? How does that even make sense? It doesn't make sense as a, the word that comes to mind is like evolutionarily, right? It doesn't make sense. To hurt ourselves. And of course, I'm young. I was in my 20s still. So I learned, like, what is my immune system and what is my immune system actually doing, and what are T cells and what's happening here? What does it look like when it's attacking a nucleus of a cell? Why is it indiscriminate? What messages am I sending myself that are making this happen? And I made a lot of changes in my life. I changed my diet. I changed my mindset. I had a lot of changes I used visualization. And the science of visualization is really starting, just like the body keeps a score, right? Like we're starting to understand the mind-body connection so much better than we ever have. And that visualization actually changes the chemistry in our body. So I had this whole, it's almost cartoon that I would play out in my head. And I would have conversations with my immune system. Like literally, I would have conversations and I would say, look, here's the deal. Like the nucleus of my kidneys, that's off limits. Like literally, I would meditate and I would go into my mind and I would talk to my cells and I would talk to my immune system and I would say, and I had these I was a horsewoman. So I had my little steeds and I had my little shield and I had my sword and I had all the things. And that was how I did this regularly. And I would tell my immune system, okay, if there's cancer cells, go crazy. Like you're all over it. But not healthy nucleus of any part of my body. So again, this was a process. And your question is, how did I feel about it? Or how did it change my perspective of my health? But I think that change came so much earlier. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't the day when I was 41 years old and I was sitting in my doctor's office and she's like, it's negative. And it was amazing. I felt like I'd won, like I was triumphant, like I was like all this time, like all these things and all the cartoons in my head and all of the, I had won. I felt like I won. And I still have doctors will say, if I tell them that I don't have lupus anymore, that I had lupus, well, I'll say I had lupus. And they're like, what? You don't hear that. Nobody says I had lupus. And I said, no, I don't have it anymore. I had it. And they say, well, you can't do that. That's not possible. But recently I had a cardiologist and she said, good for you. Congratulations. And that's what doctors need to say, right? Not, you can't do that, because that's what they tell me. Well, it's in remission or whatever. And I'm like, well, I haven't had a positive ANA in 20 years. So, and I'm healthy. I feel better than I felt. I'm 61 years old. I feel better than I felt in a long time.
I love that so much. We have talked about how the body keeps score. We talk about that a lot. And we've talked also about trauma and how trauma affects us and it can trigger autoimmunity. And so with that in mind, I'm going to ask a serious question. You mentioned this a little bit at the beginning before we started the episode today. But if you're willing, I would really love for you to explain what happened in 2023, because we know it was an incredibly difficult season for you. You lost your sister and your best friend within a short period of time. How did those losses affect you physically and emotionally?
I'll answer this more directly than the last one without backing up. In the spring of 2023, my dearest lifelong friend, who I grew up with here in Ogallala, died of pancreatic cancer. And 6 days later, my sister died from the complications from a fall. She was experiencing congestive heart failure, and she broke bones, and it exacerbated. And so she died very shortly after. 3 weeks later, and I had been so sick. In fact, I had not been able to come to spend time with my sister when she was dying because I was so sick, and I didn't know why. And it wasn't lupus. I had my ANA tested. I was like, maybe it's lupus. Maybe it is back, right? But it wasn't. So 3 weeks later, I was actually in first place in a national cooking competition to benefit the James Beard Foundation when I was diagnosed with celiac. And I'm a food writer. So it was identity loosening. I was flattened, literally. Couldn't pick my head up off a pillow for a while. It was very hard. When I finally was able, so a couple things really helped me. One was finding groups, Facebook groups, right, for celiac. That helped me a lot. And to be able to put it out there and just say, I felt so alone. I'd lost my people. Like my friend Marcia was an RN. So like, she's the one I'd call and say, like, I have celiac. What the hell? Like, what is this? Tell me what's happening. And of course, my sister was my sister. So I would call and say, right? So I'd lost my people. And my marriage was rough at that point too. So I really was alone. And I joined the celiac group. And then someone in the celiac group actually turned me on to a group of, it's led by AARP for women over 50. And that was great, but it was still online. It was still Facebook, So I decided to start a local group in Denver. And at the time I called it the Metro Denver Ethels, because Ethel was the founder of AARP, and that was like the source group. So that group grew to 150 members practically overnight of women over 50 in Denver. And it's an in-person group. And because I have celiac, then I set everything up. So I started doing different times and different days, but we've ended up on Thursdays. We meet every Thursday, not once a month, because the idea is connection, right? Well, I've made wonderful friends to this. In fact, my friend who wrote the intro into my book, she happens to be a registered dietitian and a therapist. So she wrote the intro to the cookbook. She was amazing through the whole thing. So that helped me incredibly. I was able to make connection, and I meet with these women. Now we have regularly 15 people every Thursday for coffee or for lunch. We are agendaless on purpose. We're there for connection. Once I was able to look up, I realized that I was grateful. I grew up in an agricultural community. I grew up cooking. I grew up literally picking from the garden and bringing it in and cutting it up and making dinner for the harvesters or whatever. And I realized I was fortunate and really grateful that I know how to handle food. I came from a family of people, of food people, and a lot of food professionals. I'd already written a cookbook. And I not only felt fortunate that I could feed myself and take care of myself, but that I could help other people. One of the things that I would hear in the group, in the celiac groups, is not only, I've got one right here. I lived on bars for like a month, right? Because I didn't know what to feed myself for the first time in my life. I didn't know what to eat. It was so life-altering. The celiac diagnosis in some ways was more life-altering than the lupus diagnosis. Because you have to eat 3 times, you got to eat all the time. Plus I'm a food writer, so it was really life-altering. But and so that's what I was hearing in the groups, right? So people are like, I don't know how to feed myself. And I'm like, I relate, I get it. I'm eating bars. I'm a cookbook author and I'm living on bars. But what really got me was to hear parents say, my 14-year-old or my 16-year-old was just diagnosed with celiac. I don't know how to feed my family. I don't want to make 2 meals a day. And I felt like I could help that. I thought, I can do this. Like, this is something I can do. And I was really grateful to be able to, to go down that path. So it was a really hard spring. I know that my sister and my friend are proud of me and what I've done. And I honor them with that.
They are cheering you on. I know they are.
I appreciate that.
I love that. And it sounds like you took your experience with celiac disease and your diagnosis and your experience in your support group, and you maybe used that to fuel your second cookbook, right? Like our next question was, can you tell us what inspired it and what you had in mind when you were creating it? And you answered it before we could ask. Like, you saw a need, you saw where people were struggling, and you filled that need. You are helping people learn how to live with this disease. It's hard. It's a really hard thing to deal with. Food is love in our family. It always has been. So very much like what you were saying, very similar in, and our mom was just a fantastic cook.
Yeah.
Our dad was diagnosed back when nobody even knew what celiac was. There were no gluten-free products on the market. So he had to go to the basics, rice, potatoes, he had to go to the real food. And I feel like it's a blessing and a curse that we have so many gluten-free options now. But what nobody told me when I was diagnosed was all those gluten-free options, yes, they're gluten-free, so they won't hurt you with gluten, but they're still processed food.
Yes.
They're
absolutely.
still just food-like products, And I really wish I'd had somebody who had said, okay, this is not as complicated as it's being made out to be. It's fruits, it's vegetables, it's other grains, it's meats, it's eggs, it's nuts and seeds, and all these whole foods. It's so simple, but we have grown into a culture where we eat so much processed food that now it's a foreign concept to eat whole food.
Right.
So I feel like you're kind of giving us that power back in your cookbook. So thank you for that. I appreciate
I
that
appreciate
because
that.
we were lucky to see that, how our mom did that, how our dad did it, how, we were lucky to see that. But not everybody has that. Not everybody has that. They get this diagnosis out of nowhere and they have no idea where to start.
We're already battling, food deserts, right? We're already like, I'd been doing work in food insecurity for years because I was a middle school teacher in Aurora, Colorado, right? So a lot of my kids lived in a food desert. They added a 7-Eleven. Teaching people to grow their own food, right? And for celiac, like that's, you can grow cucumbers in a 5-gallon bucket. No problem. Just about anywhere. So, that it's that eating from the source, like you're saying, like eating from, and it's when I wrote the cookbook, I included things like mashed potatoes, and it's really a beginner to eating or intermediate cookbook. You could even be an advanced cook and get plenty out of it. But
I think that's so good because, I mean, honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. There are a lot of people out there that if they've never made anything other than instant mashed potatoes,
how do you know?
And honestly, a lot of instant mashed potatoes actually have gluten in them. And so I think it's great that you're starting simple. Kind of with that in mind, do you feel like there were any recipes or strategies in your book that you're especially proud of? Maybe ones that you've had readers tell you, hey, this was great that this was in here, or just ones that make you proud personally?
Yeah. So I actually had a Facebook group of 100 recipe testers to test the recipes as I was writing the book. They were wonderful. And we're going to be in Kansas City. I'm so excited to go to Kansas City. And one of my testers is like, oh, I'm going to come see you. And I'm so excited to meet her. Julie, can't wait to meet you. Yes, definitely. So the testers, and we had some that didn't make it. The falafel, it's not in there. It didn't work ever. We just couldn't get it to work. We adjusted it. Frying food is hard. And then we decided, for kind of a beginner, maybe falafel doesn't belong. So it's not in there. But everybody loved the coconut shrimp was like one of the best. Yeah. Love the coconut shrimp. Yes. There's a lot of my mom in there. There's a lot of growing up in there, like a lot of the things that she made us. Her blue cheese dressing recipe is the best you will ever have, ever. It's amazing. My daughter's a fromagier. She's a cheesemonger. And for Murray's in Kroger here in Colorado. Well, not here in Colorado. I'm in Nebraska, but
that's a dream job.
Oh, it's her. She's very happy. Very happy.
Yeah. And the fact that she can tolerate all the dairy, that would make me so happy.
Yay, right? So far she has not been diagnosed with celiac, but and she's terrified of it, I'm not gonna lie. But I gave her the blue cheese dressing and she was like, her eyes just lit up and I'm like, right? That's your grandma's recipe. It's the best ever. And it's so funny because this recipe was like from my mom, right? In her handwriting. It was wonderful to be able to pull it out and like transcribe that recipe into the cookbook. I love that. It was for like 60 people. My mom ran a deli. She was like, she managed a deli. I'm like, this is not going to work. I got to cut this down. And you can't just cut a recipe. You have to.
Especially, dressing is one thing, but when it comes to gluten-free cooking, it's just so much trickier than that.
It so is. And one of the things that when I was researching my cookbook, is that the probably 90% of cookbooks that are gluten-free are for baking.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be able to make a cake. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm hearing from parents is I don't know what to feed my family. I don't know what to take to the football game party that we're having on Sunday. I don't know, I just need basic things, right? Basic food. And so that's really where that came from, making sure that it was accessible, like we were saying, right? For everyone.
Well, we
So
want to thank you because you're a really strong advocate and connector for the celiac and autoimmune communities by doing this. And that's huge. I think it's something that's so important. And so we appreciate that you are doing that for the
well,
community.
I appreciate that. I was asked to speak for the Colorado Springs chapter of this National Celiac Association. And we were at Three Farm Girls Artisan, just a little shout out. They're wonderful. Artisan Eatery. They're in Palmer Lake, for the celiac support group that they have once a month. The celiac community in Colorado Springs is wonderful. So supportive. So many great 100% gluten-free restaurants in Colorado Springs. So many. And it's not that big of a city.
No.
And others that aren't 100% gluten-free, but like they will take care of you. They will take care of you. So we're at Three Farm Girls, and this woman comes up and she says, I think I want to buy your book, but I want to look at it first. Is that okay? Of course, go ahead. So she comes back as I was getting ready to leave later, and she was there for a tasting for her 16-year-old daughter who'd been diagnosed a year earlier and was having a birthday party. And so she was, trying to find something safe for her party. So she says, so and she said, "Oh, I want to get this. Would you sign it?" And she was so happy. And she said, these are real meal ideas. This is real food. I'm going to feed my family so much healthier. And that was it for me. Right? That's it. That's the goal right there. Her 16-year-old, she doesn't have to cook 2 meals a day. She feels like she can eat healthier, and her daughter was excited about the food too. So that was the goal. So that was very gratifying.
Goal accomplished. Goal accomplished. I think that is amazing. And I feel like you are empowering people to cook for themselves, to get back to whole foods and real foods, and just simplify their life, because it's exhausting when you're raising a family, even if you're on your own and or married to somebody and you're trying to do gluten-free and not gluten-free. And in our house, luckily, we don't have to do that anymore. There's more of us that are gluten-free than are not, so I don't have to go through that hassle. But we still have gluten-free or regular pasta. We still have regular bread, things that, because it's expensive, dang it. It's dang expensive. So, but if you're focusing on those whole foods, it really does simplify things. I feel like,
and it's more budget friendly.
Yes, totally. Because you're not buying all the processed stuff that is $8 a package for,
Exactly. I'm going to buy peppers, and I'm going to buy onions, and I'm going to buy, it's like I'm going to buy whole meat, and I'm going to buy vegetables, and I'm going to buy rice, and I'm going to buy beans. And those aren't expensive things.
No.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up, if you had one empowering message that you would give to our audience, something that they can carry with them from your journey, what would you tell them?
I thought a lot about this because there's a lot of different messages, of course, that we learn on our journey, right? And many of them are so valuable. And one of my recent that has taken me nearly a lifetime to learn is to be here in the moment, right? To be here in the moment. But that's not it either. As important as that is, I think to take adversity and still win. Take those things that are challenging and still, you know, meet them and use those challenges to grow and to learn, and even more to help to bring others along, right? So that adversity, we all face challenges. There's no such thing as a life without challenges. But we can still win. We can still, you know, be the best that we can be. And there's so many messages that I want to say that go with that, like to love yourself through it, right? Don't beat yourself up. That's it's so self-defeating, and we do it, especially as women. Those messages that we send to ourselves. When Brene Brown said something that really always stuck with me, which was, when I realized that I talked to myself in a way that I would never talk to someone I didn't like, I knew I had to change that voice. And I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly a quote from Brene Brown, but boy, did that stick with me. You know, to change that voice in your head and, you know, help yourself love yourself, be good to yourself through it. And those are all ways to win. Those are all ways to face adversity, right? Because those challenges are we all face. And if we can uplift ourselves and uplift others, that's the whole game right there, right?
That aligns exactly with our mission.
Yeah, I was going to say, great advice. Thank you for sharing that with us. And
Absolutely.
I love that as you're telling us about your journey, it's not just wellness for the body, but wellness for the emotions and the mind and all the things, like the whole person, which is wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Your story reminds us that even in the middle of loss and challenges, there is still room for growth. There's room for healing and community. And we are really excited about your new cookbook and the impact that it is already making. We'll make sure to link it in our show notes so that our listeners can learn more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast and filling us in on all the wonderful things you've told us today. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Autoimmune Adventures. We'll be back next week with more conversations to inspire and encourage you on your journey. Remember, you are worthy of joy. Your disease does not define your life. You do.